Liberties. I'm going to read the introduction just as it was given to me, so we have no. Mike Pence was born in Columbus, Indiana on June 7, 1959, into a family that epitomized the American dream, instilling in him values of hard work, faith, and family. After graduating from Hanover College and Indiana University School of Law, he embarked on a multifaceted career, including law practice, hosting a talk show, serving as a congressman for 6 terms, and championing limited government and fiscal responsibility. He was then elected the 50th governor of Indiana, focusing on tax cuts, job creation, education reform, and infrastructure investment while maintaining fiscal responsibility. His accomplishments in Indiana led to his selection as the 48th Vice President of the United States. Pence's conservative philosophy, inspired by Ronald Reagan, led to his founding Advancing American Freedom, which continues to advocate for faith, family, and liberty as the foundation of American values. It's a delight and an honor and a pleasure. Please welcome Mike Pence to the stage.
Well, good evening, and thank you for that warm introduction. You read it just the way I wrote it. But I want to thank you all for the warm welcome today. It is an honor to be here at the 8th Annual China General Chamber of Commerce Gala, the largest turnout ever in the history of this great tradition. For 20 years, this chamber has led the charge in building the relationship between China and the United States based on shared prosperity and mutual respect. And I'm honored to be a part of this evening with so many other distinguished Americans that I deeply admire. I want to thank Senator Baucus and Governor Locke for their service as U.S. Ambassador to China and for their presence here today. I'm especially grateful to a friend and a mentor to me who served as the ambassador to China under our administration, but also has the distinction of having been the longest-serving governor in the history of the United States of America. So for me, he will always be Governor Terry Branstad. It's an honor to see you here. And to the mayors that are present here today, and governors and honored guests, it's a privilege to be with you all this evening. I also wanted to give you an opportunity because while he made his way to the podium, he didn't get the round of applause I think he deserves. He is a friend of mine. I have known his family since my days as governor of Indiana. His love for his heritage in China, his love for his fellow Americans is deeply inspiring to me. Thank you, Pin Nee, for your leadership of this organization, for bringing us together tonight. And it is good to be back in Chicago. I told Mayor Daley, it came as a surprise to him, I think, that I was raised by 2 South Side Chicago kids who made their way down to a small town in Indiana where I showed up. But Chicago will always be my second hometown. And let me take this opportunity because I know these moments are rare. But Mayor Daley, thank you for your extraordinary leadership of this great, great city for this nation. God bless you. As some of you may have heard, I was supposed to speak at CGCC 8 years ago, back in 2016 when I was governor of Indiana, but something came up. I got a phone call that took me to Washington, D.C. for 4 years, but it's my great honor to finally be here with all of you today, 8 years later. You know, I do believe it has been said already tonight that the theme of our gathering, Charter a New Horizon, is altogether fitting and particularly timely at a time of change in America and change in the Asia Pacific. Let me say emphatically, as a former Vice President of the United States and as the proud father and father-in-law of a United States Marine and a United States Navy pilot, I believe that China and the United States must charter a new horizon if we are to forge a peaceful and prosperous future in the balance of the 21st century. And I want to thank you all for your dedication to that principle. Now, many of you may not know that throughout my career I have been a strong supporter of free trade. I used to say when I was governor of Indiana that trade means jobs, and it was one of the reasons why I took a great interest in America's relationship with China from early on. I will tell you, as a Hoosier, I learned about China from neighbors and friends, companies in China like Eli Lilly that have been located in China for more than 100 years. And in my hometown of Columbus, Indiana, Cummins Engine Company, I watched, as I began my adult career, I watched the relationship between my hometown and their facilities in China grow and expand and create opportunities. I also heard from missionaries who had spent a lifetime of service in China to come back to hear about the great people of the nation that so many of you call your heritage or call your home. And I've ever been inspired by the dedication to family, by industry, and by the inspiring example of the people of China. During my time in Congress, I supported permanent normal trade relations. As governor of Indiana, I traveled to China and led a trade mission to encourage expanded investment in my home state and across the Midwest. I did so always believing in those years that expanded trade and expanded cultural exchange between our people would enhance greater cooperation and would advance the principles of free markets and freedom for America and China and the world. But despite the best hopes and intentions of many of us in this country, and I would venture to say of virtually everyone in this room, that was not to be. The truth is, after years of trade abuses, intellectual property theft, and an increasingly adversarial posture by the communist government in China across the Asia Pacific, it has become clear to many of us, sadly, that the hope of greater liberalization derived from our relationship was for naught. But today I come before you with resolve and hope that better days are ahead for the people of America, for Chinese Americans, and yes, for the people of China. Back in 2018, as Vice President, I presented the Trump-Pence administration's first major address on changing our policy toward China. In that speech, I explained that our administration was taking a new, tougher stance on China under the Chinese Communist Party's rule. I explained that for many years, leaders in both political parties seem to have turned a hopeful but ultimately a blind eye to many of China's abuses on trade and beyond, even in the area of human rights, under the misguided hope that China's newfound prosperity would lead to liberty. But our administration saw the regime in Beijing for what it was, and I still do. China, truthfully, is the greatest strategic and economic challenge facing the United States in the 21st century. Over the course of our administration, we changed the national consensus on China here in the United States. For the first time under our administration, we met military provocations in the Asia Pacific with the largest increase in military spending since the days of Ronald Reagan. We were the first country to call out Chinese leaders for their mistreatment of Uyghurs in Xinjiang and for undermining democracy in Hong Kong. And we stood up to years of those same abuses in trade by imposing historic tariffs that brought China to the negotiating table. I remember when I first met Vice Premier Liu He at an APEC conference overseas. He urged me respectfully to recognize that China, in his words, was still a developing country. And I looked him in the eye and said, not once but twice, with great respect, Mr. Vice Premier, I said things have to change. And one thing is certain as we gather tonight, change is coming, especially for those of you who conduct business in both China and the United States. And it's that to which I want to speak tonight. I mean, if you doubt it, you could see the recent bipartisan support in Congress forcing the sale of China's own TikTok. Just a few weeks from today, America will swear in a new president and a new administration that will undoubtedly return to the hawkish approach that we took when I was vice president. Now, I no longer speak for the American government, but as a private citizen, I want to assure you I will strongly support President-elect Trump's tough trade policies on China. I believe in free trade with free nations, and I believe in using access to the most prosperous economy on earth to promote the principles of human dignity and democracy around the world. Now, I'm sure as we gather this evening that many of you are concerned that future tariffs on China will hurt the economy, ours and China's, or potentially, even worse, lead to a trade war that damages both our nations. And I understand these concerns. But let me assure you of just a few things about our president-elect. Let me say with confidence, I probably know President-elect Trump better than his most ardent supporters. We spent 4 years together, many hours every day together. And on this matter in particular, I believe that I know his mind. So let me assure you of this. The threat of additional tariffs on China and other nations around the world is not a bluff. What you may not know is that I believe that with wise choices that look to the future, America's relationship with China can ultimately improve, not in spite of the president-elect's tough approach, but because of it. Now, China is our rival and an economic competitor. But China must not become our enemy. Through his brand of diplomacy and tariffs, I believe the president-elect understood this during our first term. And I fervently hope that any proposed tariffs will bring China back to the negotiating table, as it did during our administration. Now, I know this will be difficult and create challenges in the short term, but I want to say to all the leaders, Americans that are gathered here, Chinese Americans, all of you with close ties to China and its economy and its businesses, that I believe it'll be worth it in the long term. We want better for America and China, and I believe a fair and firm approach is the best way to get there. How do I know? Well, from experience. I remember during our administrations, critics said that we were too tough on China and its communist rulers. But frankly, it was precisely that tough approach that gave rise to the Phase 1 trade deal that was signed in the East Room of the White House in January of 2020. It was a trade deal that actually doubled China's imports of American agricultural goods. And it was an extraordinary, fresh, new start. I'm grateful that President Biden maintained our policies for tariffs on China, but for the most part, the relationship and the progress seemed to stagnate over the past 4 years. And I fully expect the incoming administration to pick up where we left off. So let me say, my great hope is that China doesn't view impending American tariffs as punitive or hostile, but as an opportunity to enter negotiations in good faith and create a relationship that's more free and more fair to all. I can assure you from firsthand experience that President Trump will treat China's leaders exactly as he did in the past. He will treat them with personal respect, but also with firmness and a stance that puts our nation's interests first. You need look only in the way the president-elect has already waging his positions on social media months before he's taken office. He recently expressed frustration about the flow of fentanyl into our country, the vast majority of which passes from China into the United States, claiming nearly 100,000 lives annually. But let me say this. I believe the goal of tariffs is not to isolate or restrain China, but rather the president's elect goal in tariffs is to promote better relations through actions and reform to forge a better future. I met President Xi in Papua New Guinea at the APEC conference in 2018. Now, whenever I was traveling overseas, and Senator Baucus, you may remember these experiences, I would always make a point as vice president to speak to the president about any message that he wanted me to convey to another head of state that I would be speaking with. Well, we were at a reception before the APEC dinner event. President Xi approached me and introduced himself, and I introduced myself. He asked me if I had ever been to China, and I said, Mr. President, I have. And he said, you should come back. And I said, it would be my great honor. And then I said to him that I had asked the president if he had a message for President Xi, and actually the president had two messages. And so he paused and listened, said, go ahead. And I said, well, President Trump's first message is that he likes you very much. And at that point, President Xi, who had been fairly austere up to that point, all of a sudden became very animated and said, well, I like him very much, and asked me to send his best personal regards. But then we got interrupted, as these things go, and the reception moved into the dinner, and then we had the banquet and the entertainment and the rest, and I was leaving later in the evening, and I was shaking President Xi's hand, Ben, and he looked at me and said, you told me you had two messages from President Trump. And I said, that's right, Mr. President. I said, he also told me to tell you that you need to open up your markets. President Xi looked back at me and said, dialogue is good. Well, I know the president-elect. I know there will be dialogue. But I would submit to all the leaders gathered here today and the influence that you exert in this country and in China, that the path to progress will take more than words. There are things China can do that will greatly enhance our relationship and our mutual prosperity. Open the markets greater to U.S. goods. Combat intellectual property theft. Respect freedom of navigation. Keep the promises made to the people of Hong Kong for one country, two systems. And among all the other steps China could take, let me say with the deepest respect, there would be no greater gesture of goodwill in the short term to the United States and the wider world than to free Jimmy Lai. I met Jimmy Lai at the White House in 2019. He's facing trial today in Hong Kong. There's some controversy about what we spoke about, so let me say on the record in front of so many leaders. He did not ask for any action against Hong Kong or China in our meeting. He simply came to urge us to continue to speak out on behalf of the people of Hong Kong. Now, let me say these various steps that China could consider would not only respect America's interests and those of the wider world, but they also would demonstrate the CCP's willingness to embrace a better and more peaceful future based on fairness, respect, and reciprocity. So why speak about these matters here? Well, the Bible says, blessed are the peacemakers. And that just might be where you all come in. To the Chinese companies represented so well here today, let me say I believe you have a unique role to play. You can be champions of building bridges between our two nations. Encourage the leaders of your government to take those steps that I described and others to demonstrate China's dedication to being a responsible global citizen. To the Chinese Americans who are here and American companies in this room, I urge you to stand strong on your values. Let your trading partners in China and elsewhere know what your standards are. And you expect them, the private property rights, and your own interests to be respected. And everyone else gathered here, let's remember the burden that's on our shoulders. Particularly we as Americans. I think of that proverb, to whom much is given, much will be required. This is a moment, I believe, that is either fraught with peril or filled with opportunity, and I choose to believe the latter. So for everyone gathered here, let's remember that the choices that we make, the policies that we are willing to stand for, will shape the world of tomorrow. And I believe that by standing for the timeless principles of freedom, we can chart a new horizon, a more peaceful and prosperous for all. I think it's important for the government in China to understand that America's decisions will never be separated from our belief, the belief inscribed by our founders on our Declaration, that we in this nation believe that we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. And Americans who do well to remember that China is an ancient civilization with a great people who cherish tradition, family, and achievement, and faith. In fact, as we stand here today, I'm told that there are more Chinese Christians in church on any given Sunday in China than there are members of the Chinese Communist Party. We have much more in common than could ever divide us. I believe America will never abandon our values, but I believe America will never seek to impose our values on others, but rather to inspire and to use access to the largest economy in the world to promote the basic principles of fairness and the rule of law. It's an honor to address you tonight. And I know that I'm the only thing standing in between you and a sumptuous dinner. So let me close. I hope my words tonight have conveyed respect for the people of China, firmness of resolve, and hope. There's an ancient Chinese proverb that reads, "Men see only the present, but heaven sees the future." As we go forward, let us pursue a future of peace and prosperity with resolve and faith. Faith in the ideals that we cherish, and our place as Americans in the world as a beacon of hope for all mankind. Faith in the enduring capacity of people all over the world in both of our nations to aspire to those principles. And faith that heaven sees the future, and that by God's grace it will be a future in which America, China, move beyond our present disagreements and forge a relationship grounded in mutual respect, where we can stand together proudly as partners and friends. I believe America will continue to stand strong as a new administration takes office in just a few short weeks. With one hand extended in friendship and another hand resting comfortably on the arsenal of democracy, we will still hope that China will reach back with deeds and not words to build a future based on shared prosperity and mutual respect. So help us God. Thank you for the honor of being with you tonight. And God bless you all.